All right, well, good morning. Thank you all for joining us out there in the internet world on our July Experts Exclusive, Ready, Set, Build. We have been doing these seminars for about a month, and we are going to take you through the journey of building your dream team for your next project. All right, so next I'm going to introduce all of our speakers. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so for today, we're going to start off, and the journey is we're going to go with the CPA, then the banker, our broker, designer, and then us as the general contractor. Those are the 5 key players to get a project going. This is not an exhaustive list. These are just the major players to get the project going. There are many aspects that go into a project, from insurance companies, the closing company. There's dozens of people that make a project successful. The team today that we've assembled is just your dream team to get your project kicked off and going. So let me introduce to you Amber Tyler of Eide Bailly. She's going to start off, and then we'll go to Chris Reed of First Citizens Bank. And then after that will be Brent Conway with Newmark Grubb Ellis. He's our broker. Brian Durbin, our designer, and teach us all the fun ways of programming and getting a building drawn up. And lastly, I'll end it and go through the 4 types and methodologies of construction. So Amber, I will let you go ahead.
Perfect. And so I want to start by saying welcome and apologize. My webcam was giving me fits this morning, so I decided it would be better to do it without it than have some flickering going on. So if you guys have any questions throughout this, feel free to reach out. So I'll start just by giving you guys a little bit of background about myself. And if you can go ahead and go to the next slide. One more. So I'm an audit partner with Eide Bailly, which is a national accounting firm. We're considered a top 25 firm in the United States, and we've been around for quite a while. We've celebrated our 100-year anniversary in 2017, which is something that we're very proud of. We've expanded our office, and now we have over 40 office locations in our various states. And one thing that we really pride ourselves on is we're more than just an accounting firm. So if everybody thinks about accounting, you tend to think about maybe first and foremost your own financials or even tax returns, but we do audits and reviews, as well as other services like computer consulting, so technology issues, cybersecurity, in working from home environments. We know there's a lot of issues to deal with, and we do those as well. So that's a little bit about who I am. If you could go ahead and go to the next slide for me. So if you think about getting a loan, one of the things you're likely going to need are your financial statements. And so as a business owner or key user, key decision maker in this process, you probably have financials already. But as you go to think about a loan, there are a few things to consider. What does your balance sheet look like? Does it show what is a current asset versus a long-term asset, which is considered a classified balance sheet? Or do you just maybe have a checkbook? Is your income statement set up by type of classification? What that means is, do you have the items split out to be able to tell your types of revenue, where they're coming from? Your various expenses, are they broken down into maybe what's rent, what's utilities, interest, payroll? Are the various items split out? Another thing to think about is, what is your basis of accounting? So as we think about getting a loan from a banker, they may want to know, okay, how have you kept up with your financials? Do you record expenses when you incur them? Meaning when you go and order a product, do you record that as a expense and a liability? Or do you simply record expenses as you pay them out of your checkbook? Another thing that a lot of small businesses don't include in their internal financial statements, but that is very relevant, would be a cash flow statement. That simply details where your cash is coming from and where it is going. It breaks it down into sections such as operating, financing, or investing to show the sources and uses of your funds. And then last but not least, is it timely? So a lot of times loans, if you're looking to build a building, will have requirements whereby your financials must be submitted to a bank within 90 or 120 days after year end. And so just considering, is this information available in the timeline that the bank will need it? Also, getting information more timely can help a user of the financial statement as well simply know what's going on within the business. In today's environment, we all know that it's better than ever and more relevant than ever to have information quickly available at our fingertips so we can make key decisions. So can you go ahead and go to the next slide? One thing that as you think about getting financials, you might want to consider is if you need a assistant to help you prepare those. Advisors could serve as an accounting coach to help you both interpret and understand the numbers, or simply to serve as an outsourced CFO or controller if you don't have that level within your organization. Another thing that an accountant may be able to do is help you talk to your banker in dialogue and figure out what's going on. Is your cash flow going to be sufficient to service new debt? What are the tax implications of building a building going to be? Or do we need to wait a little bit longer to be able to invest? What are the pros and cons? So definitely make sure as you're working through the consideration to build or to continue to lease that you talk to your accountant or your advisor. You talk to your banker, and last but not least, talk to your tax representatives, as there's different things that can be done throughout the building process to save a little bit of cash on the front end. Next slide, please. So some of the various items that are available as you go through a building are breaking down the costs into various components that can be depreciated quicker. So real estate typically is depreciated about 30 years, but you can go in and slice the building up, which is called a cost segregation study, and allocate the cost to various assets which have shorter lives. So kind of similar to a pizza, you could slice it up and say, okay, 100,000 is allocable to cabinets that have a 7-year life, or maybe 200,000 is associated with electricity, which has a much shorter life, or carpet. And so slicing out those segments to get a tax benefit. Another thing that you can do is if you are building an energy efficient building, there are various deductions and credits that can be available that even though that might cost more on the front end through the checks that you write vendors, it could result in a significant tax savings that you would want to capitalize on. And the last thing definitely to be aware of as you're looking into a building and potentially getting a loan or investing a lot of cash into a construction process is just consider the debt service payments, what's going to go on in the tax arena, which I think some of the other presenters will touch on again. And last but not least, what other things might you need to do with your cash inflows or outflows? So that's just a brief introduction into the financial segment of building a building. And with that, I will turn it over to Chris, I believe.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully, Dima and everybody over on that side can get the slides transitioned. Great job, Amber. Always love to hear from the side that I work with the most when it comes to these type deals. So thank you again for joining us, everyone. I love these, the opportunity that Dima and her team give us to highlight a very stressful and difficult process for business owners. But the goal of these things is to bring peace to this process and to have resources and teams that will help get you there. My name is Chris Reed, Vice President here at First Citizens Bank. My portion today is obviously going to highlight the banking side, the relationship-driven construction loan process. And I title it that specifically because it's super important to have a good relationship with each aspect of your team. Why? Because honesty, communication are massive things. And we'll get into that a little bit. So if you want to go to the next slide, I have two little funny memes that are, I didn't think the last time we did this that these would still be relevant, but they are, oddly enough, because we're going still through the issues of COVID. So right now there may be peace to somebody coming in and not being sick with COVID instead of robbing the bank. I never like to joke about it, but we need to laugh every once in a while. And actually last night I went grocery shopping and seems that stores are running out of toilet paper again. So if there's anything you learned from today, go get the toilet paper. Kidding. Moving on to the next slide, a little bit about First Citizens itself. We have a unique model. We were originated, now it's close to 122 years ago, in North Carolina and in South Carolina. In those markets, we are very much like a Bank of Oklahoma or MidFirst. We're on every corner. We have signage everywhere, but outside of those markets, which we're in 19 states total, we highlight and specialize in business banking. Very private, centered and focused banking just on businesses to help them have that relationship that they need, especially when it comes to this process. So we made it through 2008, 2009 with no TARP money. We're still doing well as a bank. We're growing through this crazy situation that everybody's dealing with. It's a solid bank from a standpoint of how we borrow and how we lend. And so we can get into that a little bit more when we talk to clients. But one thing that makes us unique is our rates, and our rates come directly from the fact that we lend out all of our own money instead of borrowing from other institutions. So it allows us to really drive down those rates for business owners. And when they're building a building process, as Dima can preach to, every dime counts. And so we like to make sure we help towards that in any way possible. On to the next slide. I'm a big picture person, so hopefully this makes it simple for everybody. Like I said in the beginning, it's extremely valuable. I've seen this process go really well many times, and I've seen it go really poorly many times. And typically at the center of all of that was the communication. And so when you have a team that you can trust, that knows what they're doing, which is the whole reason why we do these, it brings a lot of peace to the process that is new construction for your building. And so what I like about all the individuals we circle with these events is they're all very trustworthy and honest people that are going to tell you how it is up front from the start so that you're not surprised. And so that's a big thing here at First Citizens. What we do and what I like to do is I like to tell you about all the pitfalls and things that we may run into up front to make it comfortable. So when those things happen, it's not as much of a surprise. So again, it highlights a good solid team of what you would need. You're going to touch each one of these areas throughout this process and in different flows and different focuses as far as the contractor, the broker, realtor, architect, CPA, and banker. And so it's important, again, to have a good solid team and realize that we're going to be communicating with all of these parties throughout this whole process just until we get it completed and you're happy. If you can move on to the next slide, I'll kind of walk through a very short description of what happens typically from our side. And again, I'll try to be as brief as possible. Anytime as a bank, we look at borrowers, it's always risk driven. So we're looking at the quality of the borrower, especially in this scenario where it's a ground up construction. It's not necessarily so much about the site or the asset. Obviously, our goal is to create a solid asset that's built well. That's why Dima's here. But it's also to mitigate the risk and understanding who the borrower is and the team around them. When it's new construction, it's so crucial that you have the right broker in place that shows the right site for drainage and for water, for ground issues, for cost when it comes to site development, as well as the right CPA to put all of the documentation together that we're going to need so that just like Amber said, the cash flow makes sense to us, the right design team to know that we're not overbuilding it. And then obviously DEMA, that makes all of it come together and get to the finish line. In our initial meeting, we'll highlight this. We like to get in the start of the process sooner than later. And the reason is because we want to get a good idea of what you can afford with this process to get you at least pre-qualified. Prior to approval, we'll work preferably with your CPA to get all of your financials together, to look at where your strengths and your weaknesses are financially, and where we may have some pitfalls, and where we can come up with some creative ways to get across that goal line. Typically just a high level, 3 years of personal and business tax returns, personal financial statement, and business debt schedule, along with some recent financials, is where we will start with the process. But again, get a good team around you of a CPA. That way we can work directly with them because they know exactly what we need for this process. Post-approval, our pre-closing, this is a very exciting thing, right? You got approved, everything looked good, we're ready to get started. What's next? At this point, we'll have a budget get close to the finalization with your construction team, what that looks like, timing, how draws are gonna work, and how all of that will work together with the team you've put in place. And so it's an exciting part, but this is really when things start to ramp up and get going. And then of course, post-closing, once the loan is completely finished and all of the distributions have started, then we maintain and continue our relationship with that team and your team as a bank. And so we don't leave the process. We're very involved. I think a big reason why First Citizens does the way we do it is because we like to be there with you every step of the way. And so very focused thing for us. The last slide, if you guys don't mind switching to that, is a highlight of just a few of our team members here. We're a smaller team here in the market, which is good because we are able to focus directly on each client specifically. But we have just a quick highlight of some people that may be involved in the process. So again, there's so much more into this, like Amber said, that goes into those meetings, but I want to give a high level view of what the bank side needs and looks for. But again, thank you, DEMA, and your team so much for continuing to be a champion of all this. So I guess we'll pass it on to the next presenter.
Chris, thank you. Brent Conway with Newmark Grubb here in Oklahoma City. I have been in this business now for almost 17 years, and much of the time I have spent in helping business owners find the right space, be it a lease or be it a build-to-suit. But in these days, it seems that the owning your own office is becoming more and more an option that's a realistic option, as opposed to one where people say, this is a good idea, I want to pursue this. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this process and being surrounded by people that have forgotten more than I'll ever know about the process of owning versus leasing. So we want to jump in with the next slide. Let's just go forward. Anytime you start your business, you've always got three options, really just two. Do I want to lease my space or do I want to own it? And as I said, and as Amber and Chris have pointed out, in today's economy and our troubling times, so to speak, there's not a better option than than owning, just for obvious reasons, because your barriers to entry are lower today as a result of the cost of capital than what they were, gosh, even 6 months ago. We're seeing historic rates. And then of course, with the COVID quarantine and the virus going around, it's really an opportune time to own your own office space and control your own destiny. But it begs the question, is leasing the right option, or is owning the right option? And I think all the panelists would agree that right now there's no better option than to own, because it allows you to really capitalize on the equity of owning versus leasing. So when we go to the next slide, if you want to, we'll talk more about how that can be broken down and discussed individually. And as Chris would say, there's no better opportunity for a lender to loan money than to a guy that's saying, I want to own my own office building, because When you own your own office building, you're much more likely to take care of it, and you're much more likely to make your payments on time because that's where you're doing your business. But you've got to first consider a couple of key items. And number one is the most important to me. You look at 10 years and you say to yourself, if I'm planning on keeping my business in operation in its current form, this would be a good avenue to proceed. If, however, in the next 10 years, I anticipate explosive growth, then more than likely building a building is not the right idea unless you plan to build a much bigger building, or in some cases, a much smaller building than what you use currently. But if you don't see any significant changes on the horizon, then absolutely, let's look at building a building and owning it and going forward from there. So let's go to the next slide. When you look at purchasing your own building, the most important rule of thumb is the building itself, or the actual act of owning the real estate, can't go beyond the scope of your core business. So the building is going to be to support your business. It's not going to be the driver of your business. And this is actually a mistake that a lot of people make. They say, well, I'm going to own my own buildings, so I might as well be a landlord. So I'll build a bigger building that I can grow into, and I'll lease out space. And just from experience, oftentimes it's a great idea. We love you for that. We want to build as big a building as possible. But when you go into a business arena that detracts from your core business, all of a sudden the space that you occupy becomes a secondary job. And in often cases, it becomes your primary focus because you've got to fill up the excess space. So bullet point number 2, your real estate should never become your core mission unless real estate is your core business, in which case you already know all these answers. So you need to match your investment strategy where it applies to the building that you're building for your offices to tailor your business needs for realistically the next 10 to 15 years. Next slide. So the financial impacts of owning your own building versus leasing it. And Chris and Amber can absolutely do a much better job than I could. But essentially, if we said over the next 10 years, I want to make X, I want to get a 8.5% return or a capitalization rate. What do I need to do? And so the graph there illustrates what your rental income needs to be versus what you're paying for the building to get that 8.5% return over the next 15 years. And it's really pretty simple. But the delta between an 8.5% return on a building that you own versus the return on investment for a lease is really not even comparable. So you have an occupancy cost, which is what you look at as a business owner, of $1,559 on average to own your own building if it's a 3,200 square foot building, versus $18.50 a square foot to rent that same space in a comparable building. And again, you're not getting anything in return for that other than a place to park your rear in a chair and do your business. So it's really not any comparison if you're looking at building equity and creating wealth versus actually leasing a building. And then we go into the depreciation, and we go into accelerated depreciation, which Amber talked about, segmented depreciation, and that's when you start to really see a tremendous return on your investment. Next slide. So there's a lot of words on this page. But really the 3 most important things, obviously you want to know your each party's role that's involved with the process. You also want to know your business versus just having general market knowledge. But to me, of course, because I'm a broker, the most important party to the whole thing, because they're really the facilitator, is the actual broker, be it me or someone like me that is not nearly as handsome, but actually is knowledgeable. That broker is going to act as a third party or representative, and he or she is going to have your best interest at heart. Your lawyer obviously is going to be on your side as well, but they're not necessarily going to be the guy that's in the trenches and trying to find the right place for you, but they are going to be looking towards your best interest at the end of the day. Chris Reed, or your financier or lender, is also going to be a key role. They're going to have a much more flexible and greater familiarity with the actual process of lending, but not necessarily the corner that you want to have your building on. But they're a very intrinsic role in the process. But as equally as important as the broker perhaps is your CPA, because that person is going to be the one that says this is a good idea and this makes sense because of X, Y, and Z, or not. And like Amber said, they're going to prepare the front end to give all the information to Chris, and are also going to be able to paint the picture to you on the back end. This is what your return would look like over the next 10 to 15 years. So those are the three, to me, the three more important parts of the process. No offense, Brian, but those are very integral players in the deal. And then, of course, you want to maintain control of this from cradle to grave. The developer that you're working with, the architect, the broker that you're working with, your own lawyer, they're all going to have a part of the puzzle. But at the end of the day, you want to maintain control because you know your business better than anybody because it's your business. Next slide. So that's all I've got. If there's any questions, feel free to call me. Next presenter.
Hello, my name is Brian Durbin. I am a designer here in Oklahoma City. I've been doing this since 1993. It is my basic goal. My basic job is to help, as it relates to this conversation, people create their dream, particularly as it relates to the facilities and the spaces that they need to conduct business. I've been all over the world, seen lots of cool things, and I like to bring that stuff back to my clients. And I believe those things help me create some unusual and exciting projects for my clients. And I want to thank DEMA for including me on this. We've done several projects together over the years, and we've always had a really good time. It is very important, no offense to the financial people, that the designer and the construction company have a really good relationship. And that's one of the things that makes my relationship with DEMA so strong is she knows my dysfunction as a designer, and she helps me make what I am doing for my client come to life without making anybody any poorer than they have to be. So next slide. Here is just a quick graphic just to kind of give you a rough example of some of the imagery that you might receive when we start the design process. In the upper left corner, that is a high-end residential project. This is some graphic design that I've put together that I helped the client create some budget cost analysis so they could see what the project is going to look like, so they could give it to their lender, so their lender kind of had an understanding of what they were going to accomplish. One of the key things that happens as it relates to design and the financing side is a lot of times people come and they say they've got a project, and more often than not they do, but they don't have a really good solid understanding of what all that means. So I step in and I can help with these types of graphics, help a lender understand, or maybe help a broker if they're going to be leasing the project, help them understand what this project is going to consist of, what it's going to look like, the feeling, the lifestyle that we're trying to create. And a lot of times that helps promote and move the project down the road. Next slide, please. So the process as it relates to the designing of your new space or your new building is, this is by no means an exhaustive list of all the parts and pieces, but this is a basic outline of the process and what we will do as the project develops. Programming phase refers to basically it's the discovery phase of the designer working with the client to determine the parts and pieces that are going to be needed to make your facility work and function the way that it needs to, from an efficiency standpoint. You know, if you're manufacturing, are there layout paths that you need for transferring raw material to equipment, shipping, et cetera, things of that nature. In a more conventional situation, do you need 5 offices, a lab, and a lobby? Do you need 3 large conference rooms? So really, we're starting to dig down into the parts and pieces that you need to make your facility function the way you want it to give you the best opportunity for success as a business. This includes site investigation. So if you're looking for land and you have developed a general programmatic requirement for what your building is going to need, I'll go out on the site with you. We can look at the site, make some preliminary determinations about what would be required to make the building fit work on that property or on that site. So really the programming is overall an overlying organizational plan for the whole project. I take that program information and I bring it back to my team and we begin the schematic design process. What that essentially means is we take all those parts and pieces relative to the site, relative to the building, or whatever the specifics are for the project, and we start outlining. And myself personally, I'm a hand sketcher. I come up with a pretty picture that outlines all the parts and pieces, and you're able to start looking at how that interacts, how each one of those spaces interacts with one another. And you're able to start understanding some of the things like Office A needs to be closer to Office B because those guys work together all the time, or we want to make sure that these conference rooms are in closer relationship to the executive office as opposed to an open office space. So you're actually able to see physically what that space might look like and how it's going to function for you. And this is a very hands-on phase. It's actually probably the most fun phase for the client because you're actually able to really see what you're doing and give as much input as possible to make sure that the space is going to function properly. Once that's the schematic design base has been established, then we take that into design development phase. Now, this is where the proverbial rubber meets the road from a design construction standpoint. All of the data that we created, all the drawings and sketches that we created in the schematic design now start to take more real form. We start to think about actually how we're going to construct the building, general material ideas, overall look, feel, scale, things of that nature. Once we get that design development about a 50% established, I then start passing it off, assuming that we have a contractor involved. And in my case, I generally always have a contractor involved, DEMA. I start passing on the design development documents to her, and we start going through the process of overall cost data. Now, this relates back to your financing portion. Generally speaking, when people get to myself and DEMA, they've got a basis for financial expectation, and they've that gives us a ceiling of sorts to know what we are designing to or what we're trying to keep the project at. The design development portion is probably one of the most important phases as it relates to managing or controlling our costs. It's very easy, as DEMA can attest, for me to design way up to the moon, and then we have to come in and start pulling little things out to make sure that we keep the budget managed. So that's really an important phase in terms of helping you get your budgets established. Once that design element is presented to you, that's kind of your I wouldn't call it your last chance, but it's one of your latter chances to make major changes. And once you sign off on that, we're establishing that the project is at a 90% design level. Then I take that to my team and we start the process of construction documents. The construction documents is probably the least exciting part from a client standpoint. A, because it takes a little bit longer time because there's a lot of detail being put into it, but it's also you're literally down into the nuts and bolts and screws and drywall and the little bitty parts and pieces, the minutia that consumes a lot of time and isn't quite as exciting. But this phase actually will set the guide or the base for how I work with the contractor as it relates to actual constructability. Because at this point, we've been doing a lot of pie in the sky, dreaming, thinking, developing, coming up with overall schemes. At this point, the contractor and myself, and of course the owner, we're really starting to hash down into the details. What kinds of tiles, what color of paint, and I mean the list goes on. It's quite extensive. At the completion of construction documents, the contractor has a great vision of the project cost. The owner has an absolute vision of the project. And now we can go and take that to the city's local jurisdictions and technically begin the construction process. Once the construction process begins, one of the key elements that makes or breaks, in my personal opinion, a project successful is whether or not the designer stays on once construction starts. Generally speaking, they do, but not in all cases. It is my belief, and again, this ties back to my working relationship with DEMA, I like to stay involved on the owner's behalf and to help with the construction process to ensure that all those little intricacies, all those little details, all those parts and pieces that we worked out through the previous 4 phases get carried through. And additionally, kind of as a secondary set of eyes on behalf of the contractor for quality control, quality assurance measures. In the end, all of these processes put together allow for you to have a complete, concise project done at a correct budget, and that ensures it's going to last a long time, look nice for a long time, and help you work and efficiently do your business. If you have any questions about any of those processes, each one of them can be broken down into other variables in terms of the types of things we can do to help ensure the project goes the direction you want to go. I'm available all the time. I'm with DEMA a lot, so if you can't get hold of me directly, you can call her because I'm probably right next to her. Thanks very much for your time. I hope that we can help you with your future projects.
Thanks, Brian, and thank you to all of our great presenters. Well, we're in the home stretch. I'm the last, so I got about 5 minutes, and we'll let everyone go back to the real world. So my name is Dima Ramadan. I'm with DBG Construction, and we are gonna go over the 4 construction methodologies. So next slide. Wanted to cover a little bit about us. We started in 2007, which was a really opportune time right before the September 2007 market crash. We opened up in May 5th. So we always celebrate Cinco de Mayo. And we survived that. We survived that crash. We made it through the little bit of a downturn in the market in 2013, 2014, and now we have COVID. So it's kind of been our methodology for DBG. We've turned into recession babies, and we know how to conquer it. Our purpose is to contribute to the world by providing an experience that inspires and delights the community, and it's really important that our clientele enjoys the process. And this is why we're here today, to help you understand the process so that you build a dream team to handhold you through this and allow you to do your day job and work along the while constructing your building. Mission, we bring teams together to build a better, faster project than any other general contractor. The areas I'm going to cover today are the major development methods, which is design, bid, build, which is also known as low bid, construction management, negotiated bid, design, build, and then lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about the development projects. So design, bid, build. This is also known as hard bid, typically done in the public world. you can see the owner hires the architect separately. You get a full set of plans, and then you bid it out to general contractors, who then in essence bid it out to subcontractors. So you have bidding almost at 2 different levels. This will net you the lowest possible bid, and your construction documents are 100% complete prior to the bid. So in this methodology, you will on your own as a client, potentially with a lawyer or a friend, go through the process with finding your CPA, your banker, your broker, architect, and then we'll meet you at the end on this deal. The downside to this is if you're not a public entity, and this is also a downside for the public entity, you start to see the state of Oklahoma is moving towards more construction management projects. The cons of this is competitive bidding process will limit the general contractor's ability to navigate through the design and construction discrepancies. So Brian had mentioned, and we'll talk about this in the other methodologies, working hand in hand at design development with the designer and architect to ensure that the project comes into bid. During design bid build as a hard bid project, the general contractor is not involved. And so they don't have that opportunity to catch any potential issues that, not issues, but over designing that may occur. Because the incentive is to be competitive, important items can be left out or important details aren't discussed. So if the texture isn't identified, the general contractor is going to make an assumption and they're going to do spray texture where you may want a level 5, which is the really flat finish so you can put wall covering on it, or you may want an orange peel texture. That would end up being a change order for you down the road and may become a surprise because it wasn't identified in the construction documents. This is very linear sequencing, as I mentioned, to where there is no overlapping and you're waiting for one item to finish till the next, which can cause a longer duration before construction starts. Just because you get a low cost on the front end does not mean it is the best way. We've all heard the statement, you get what you pay for. So this low cost on the front end almost guarantees that you're going to have change orders on the back end. And so then that doesn't work out well with your banker, and Chris is going to call me and he's going to be upset because we may be going over your budget. And lastly, the owner is responsible for all the changes because you are hiring the architect separately from the GC. Next, I will go over a project. This was in downtown Oklahoma City. This was a design bid build project. Ironically, this project did come over a budget for Chase. It was over designed. We were one of 3 private bidders. After we won the project, the client called us and said, can you cut out $250,000 out of the project, out of a $2 million project? So we had to work with the architect, which took more time. The client had to pay more money to their architect so they could redesign using our estimating department to help bring costs down, which now leads me into our next item, which is construction management. So construction management is where the construction manager or general contractor get involved earlier on. So you can bring your construction manager on from day one when you're meeting with your CPA and banker, as well as with your broker. This allows you during that pre-construction stage, which there is a small fee for that, the construction manager can go to the sites that your broker is taking you to and vet the project prior to buying. So if you're buying a building, we can go and assess any issues that we may see before buying the building, which will enable you to decrease the cost of the building or go and find another building. Same with land. We can go look at land and identify that it may be a blue line, which means that we have to adhere to federal guidelines and you can't touch that water, or we might have drainage issues because it's wetlands and the land is set lower than the streets. There's all kinds of issues that may arise. And so with construction management, it allows you to come in earlier. In this situation, as the owner, you still are able to hire your architect and design team separately than your general contractor. And then the competition happens on the subcontractor level or bidding it out. Typically, when you pick out your construction manager, it's during an interview process. So it's not really going off of money. There's 2 different types, CM at risk and then CM agency. CM agency is when these are your larger projects, typically over $20 million, that a owner or a public entity will hire a construction manager as agent and that construction manager will walk them through all the different steps to then hiring a general contractor. So the pros is it's benefit for less experienced owners without in-house construction capability. It's less expensive than hiring someone full-time. You just hire them as a consultant as you would hire your lawyer or CPA or dentist, any professional that you work with. It definitely saves money because you can find issues in the beginning. With multi-phase projects, you saw one of Brian's pictures where you had a master plan and you have different phasings of buildings, or even your project where you want to build onto later. This allows for that. And it allows you to plan a complete picture and then price that out along the way. What's great about that is if it's a master plan, you have an idea over, if it's going to be built over 10 years, what that total project cost is going to be and what each building timeline, if you start year 1 and then year 3, year 6, it allows you to plan in advance for that. There's risk reduction because we establish a GMP, which you'll hear a lot, the guaranteed maximum price. And so you work alongside, we would work alongside your banker and your CPA to understand what's the maximum amount of dollars you can spend. And then we design to that versus designing and then figuring out what the price point would be. And it reduces the scheduling problems. So the cons with this is really comes down to your team. If you have not done your homework and vetted your architect and designer or your general contractor, in this situation, you are tied to that person. But that's no different with your general contractor in a design bid build situation. Once you start that project, you're tied to that person. So the upside to this is you want to interview your construction manager, interview your architect designer, and ask for references, validate the types of projects they've done, and experience to ensure that they are going to provide you with the best output. All right, so my next slide, I will go over IBC Bank in Dallas. So this was a CM project. When the architect came to us, they only had 6 pages drawn up. So we had a demo plan, a floor plan, and some elevations. We were able to, off of those 6 pages, provide a budget for the client. And then we worked alongside the architect while they finished out their drawings to ensure that we came within budget. It was a very short duration project. This was a major remodel of 10,000 square feet, and we finished it in 4 months. Because we were in Dallas and we knew the situation of permit, we were able to work alongside the architect, get permit drawings out quicker. We paid for an expedite fee. We had a permit in 6 days versus 6 weeks. We expedited the steel, and that's what ensured that this project got done so quickly. We started demo and rough-ins and sheetrock before we had complete drawings. And this allows, instead of that linear sequencing, what's A, B, C, we are able to start one item and then in the middle of, before we finish plan, start construction, and that helps shorten the process. So the next item that I'm going to talk to you about is negotiated bid. This is the scenario if you saw on the Chase Bank project, they actually got a 2-for-1 deal. They bid it out and then they negotiated later. Typically, negotiated bid is when you have a standard building that you're building over and over again, which happens a lot in the restaurant industry. And so your client or your architect get to choose the contractor that you're working with, and the costs are very transparent. There's a fee that's set for the GCGRs, which is general conditions, and then the general contracting fee. And at that point, a budget is established and you design to those budget per line item. So the cons of this is it's predicated on the building type, and the design may be less creative just because you are stuck to a very tight budget. Retail is very expensive, the dirt is expensive, the building is expensive, so they try to maximize their dollar. Here you see the competitions on the subcontractor end. Next slide. So Zaxby's is a project that we did out in Yukon. We built this in 4 months. This was a negotiated bid project. Next slide. So last of the 4, before we go into development, is design build. This is the most integrative model where the general contractor hires the architect. The client still has their choice, and they interview the general contractor as well as the architect designer. And at this point, you are able to have the most integrative method. It's very flexible. The general contractor and designer are working from day one. They're even out there looking at the land with your broker to help you understand what can go on there. And in this situation, we can do some schematic drawings to say, this is what your floor plan may look like. This helps you design on a tight budget because it's streamlined. You can build it faster. You really get to capitalize on innovation here. The downside on this is, again, it's predicated on you finding the right team and vetting them and making sure they're doing a good job. So next, this is a project that was design build Dunlap Cotting. We did this in 7 months, and this is one that we actually planned because it was design build and they knew that they would be growing. We put columns and piers to build on this later. So we can build 2 stories on top of this current building, which is a 100-year-old building. And then in the parking lot, we designed it where they can go 3 stories up. So then you cantilever over and you tie into the current building. So we can literally double, almost triple the size of their building without interrupting their day-to-day work. We would start building construction and then cantilever over, finish that out, and then over weekends tie in the 2 buildings because of the way we were able to plan and design it. So lastly, the option is development. Next slide. And so the development projects is where, as a developer, we will actually go and buy your land. A lot of medical professionals like this, where they're busy, they don't want to deal with the the ins and outs of getting financing. So as a developer, we will buy your land, obtain the loan, build your project out, and then do a one-time close at the very end. You're involved through it all the way through. It is a design build method to where we hire the architect and hold your hand through that, but you're not burdened with the day-to-day and monthly issues that may arise, and you get your product and you have a one-time close versus closing on a loan in the beginning, building your project, and then closing at the end. So in conclusion, no matter which of the above project delivery methods you choose on your next project, just remember the strengths and weaknesses of the individuals you're working on your project with. And that will have the most impact in the manner in which you organize your contracts. So all this is important, and it's key that you bring the right people to the table. And Henry Ford said it best, if everyone is moving forward together, then success takes care of itself. We really appreciate you taking this hour out of your day. We can open up the floor for questions for a couple of minutes, and we will also email out this recording and provide you name and email addresses and phone numbers for all of our panelists if you want to reach out to them personally. Thank you so much. Take care.